It is time for my 2023 Chicago Bears mock offseason, where I'll be going through trades, re-signings, cuts, free agency, the draft, extensions, every single possible thing the Bears could do this offseason. I'll be simulating in this video right here. It's going to be a very long video, so I recommend you guys get a drink or something or get a snack, sit back, relax, because it's going to be a lot of content in this video right here. What's going on, guys? I'm back with another Chicago Bears offseason discussion video, which I'll be doing pretty frequently in the next month before the 2023 league year actually starts. I believe it starts on March 15th, so that's when you can officially sign free agents and do trades officially. But trades can actually happen even beforehand, like the Matt Stafford trade between the Lions and the Rams happened, I believe, around Super Bowl time a couple years ago. So you can still do trades right now, but officially it's not going to be, in the books until March 15th. So we have a month about to speculate on what the Bears could potentially be doing in free agency, in the draft, etc. Because, man, we have a lot of assets this offseason, okay? In case you guys have been living under a rock for the past couple months, okay, the Bears have by far the most salary cap space in the NFL. We have about $90.9 million to spend right now before doing any cuts or any adjustments to the roster. In context, the second and third highest teams combined have about $90 million to spend. Most teams in the league this year, they only have $20 to $30 million to spend in free agency, so we have more money than most teams in the league combined, and even that money is going to be going higher after we do cuts and other adjustments to the roster. So a boatload of money to spend in free agency. We will not be outbid on any player that we actually want because we can afford to pay them as much money as they want. Okay, if Ryan Poles actually does want that player, and if you look at the draft, we have the #1 overall pick in the draft for the first time since 1947. Okay, a long time it's been since we have the first pick in the draft, and we have 7 other picks too in later rounds, including multiple picks in rounds 4 and rounds 5. So we control free agency, we control the draft, and for the first time in a long time, man, the Bears have a chance to seriously lay the long-term foundation of this roster for many years to come, right? Because we have just never seen the Bears have this much cap space, this much draft assets in one offseason ever, probably in the history of this franchise. So very important year for GM Ryan Poles. Okay, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to build a sustainable and competitive roster for the long term. Obviously, it's not going to be fixed immediately. Like, we're not going to fix every single spot immediately, right? Because there's just so many holes on this roster. It was the worst roster in the league last year, but it should be expected to be a lot better after this year with how much money we have to spend and how much draft capital we have as well. Speaking of the money, guys, I've seen a lot of people in my comments and online talking about, the Bears potentially not spending that much, even though we have so much cap space, because they think that Ryan Poles is going to be frugal with this money and he wants to build this thing through the draft, which is still true for the most part, right? Like, Ryan Poles still wants to build this team, mostly from the draft, so it can be competitive for the long term. But guys, the Bears are actually going to be forced to spend money this year because we have a salary cap floor that we have to meet. Okay, so according to Brad Spielberger on Twitter, he said that by his estimations, the Bears have to spend about $235 to $240 million in 2023 cash to meet the minimum, with about $93 million currently on the book. So that means the Bears have to spend about $147 million in cash this year to meet the minimum, okay, to avoid being penalized by the league for not spending enough money. Okay, and obviously that cash is not going to be only hitting the cap space this year. Okay, that's going to be total cash given out in total contract money. Okay, so if you, for example, give out a $30 million contract for 4 years, that would count towards cash spent this year, according to my knowledge, right? So we don't have to spend more than the cap space we actually have this year. That would not make any sense, but we do have to spend a lot of money this year in total contracts given out, because the Bears currently are not spending much money at all. Okay, we mostly have rookies and young guys under contract. So don't worry about the Bears not spending enough money, because we will be forced to spend money, guys. We'll be forced to give out a lot of contracts to other players, which could be viewed as a bad thing too, because we probably are going to overpay some guys. But that's what free agency has always been, guys. Like, free agency always has been overpaying guys to some extent based on what they did in the past. It doesn't mean that you should never pay free agents at all, because a lot of great teams have been built with the help of free agents, but the main roster building should still be through the draft, okay, by drafting good players in every round. But obviously the Bears have to spend money because we're not spending any money whatsoever right now. But enough talking, guys. Let's get on with the mock offseason. And before I begin, I do want to give a quick shout out to Quentin Crisco of OnTap Sportsnet for creating a very helpful Google spreadsheet that I'm using to help me with the math of doing this mock offseason. So I've actually linked it down below if you guys want to play with it yourself. But basically you can cut guys, you can sign guys, do free agency, you can do the draft on there, and it's going to do all the dirty work for you in regards to the salary cap numbers, right? So you don't have to do all the math yourself. So again, shout out to him for making this very helpful document. But let's get into the video. Okay, so first I'll be going through cuts, which players I'll be cutting from the team, going through the most notable cuts first of all. All right, first guy I'll be cutting is Al-Quadin Muhammad. Cutting him will save about $3.9 million towards the cap. Now, obviously, Al-Quadin Muhammad was one of Ryan Poles' first signings in free agency, and he turned out to be a massive bust. Okay, I don't think there's anybody that thinks that Al-Quadin Muhammad deserves to be a starter going forward, because last year he only had one sack despite having multiple opportunities to start. He wasn't really good against the run either, so I think it makes total sense to, cut ties here and free up a spot for somebody else to start on this defensive line. Okay, so we're cutting him. Next cut is going to be Cody Whitehair, guard. Cutting him will save the Bears about $9.9 million as a post-June 1st cut. Okay, so it's going to be a hefty chunk of change the Bears will be saving by cutting him, and I think it makes total sense to cut ties here because he's on the wrong side of 30, guys. He's going to be 31 next year. He got injured last year. He only played in a handful of games, and getting more injured, his play is declining somewhat. He's been a pretty reliable Bear for the majority of his career, right? We drafted him. He's been with us for a long time. He started at center and at guard too, and he's not a bad player by any means, but I feel like the Bears are going in a different direction right now, in a younger direction, and getting a younger and potentially cheaper guy through the draft or through free agency would be an upgrade from a value perspective. Now, I'll be cutting a lot more guys as well right now, but in real life, these guys will not be cut until August. Okay, so the guys I'm about to go over, these guys will not be cut until August because you're allowed to have a 90-man roster and you don't want to make cuts until you absolutely have to. So these guys are kind of like the bottom of the roster, practice squad guys that we maybe drafted last year in like the 6th or 7th round, or we claimed on waivers. And again, in real life, we would not be cutting them probably until August, middle of August, but I'm doing it right now for simplicity's sakes to just show you guys who I think is going to make the final 53 and how much money will be saved by cutting those guys eventually. So I'll be going through this kind of fast because there's a lot of guys on this list. So center Doug Kramer will be cut, Michael Ojemudia, cornerback Harrison Hand, cornerback Greg Stroman, cornerback Terrell Lewis, edge rusher Jerry Green, edge rusher Jalen Holmes, interior defensive lineman Donovan Jeter, another interior defensive lineman Keanu Dang, linebacker Jatari Carter, guard Kellen Dyche, offensive tackle Treston Ebner, running back Adrian Colbert, safety AJ Thomas, safety Chase Allen, tight end Doris Fountain, wide receiver Nasimba Webster, wide receiver, and Joe Reed, wide receiver, will all be cut. Now, some of these guys will be going to practice squad if I had to guess, right, because we drafted some of these guys. So, for example, I don't know, like a Jatari Carter guard, he might be going on practice squad next year, but I don't see him making the final 53 probably. And after all the cuts, guys, we have $120,743,775 to spend in free agency. I repeat, $120 million to spend in free agency. That is absolutely insane, okay? But I'll still be trying to spend it somewhat wisely, not just overpaying guys that we don't need or guys that aren't that good, because obviously Ryan Poles is still going to try to hand out, pretty fair contracts from the point of view of the Bears. Okay, we don't want to be overpaying guys too much, but again, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to be having to overpay some guys somewhat because we have to meet the salary cap floor and spend a certain amount of money without being penalized. So for the contracts I'll be handing out in free agency, I'll be using PFF's predictions on their website on what they think these players are going to be paid, because they're actually pretty accurate. I used them last year, and most of the contracts I gave out were pretty accurate, besides for Christian Kirk's contract, which I think nobody saw it coming, how much he got paid, how much he got overpaid, a lot of people would say. So I'll be using that for my contract predictions. But let's get into re-signing some of our own players. Okay, so which players on the squad from last year I'll be bringing back for this year. Let's get into it. First guy I'll be re-signing is running back David Montgomery to a 3-year, $19.5 million deal with the first-year cap hit of $5.2 million. Now, obviously, I thought about, letting Monty walk, maybe getting a higher tier running back like a Saquon or like a Josh Jacobs or a Tony Pollard. But I feel like Monty is pretty reliable as the number one back, right? Like, you don't need an elite top of the market back to win football games. You need a adequate, decent one, and Monty definitely is adequate and decent as your RB1. Okay, he's a reliable pass catcher, he's a good pass protector too, which obviously Khalil Herbert is not. So getting him back as RB1 will be pretty big, and he would be relatively cost effective too as compared to a Saquon or a Tony Pollard, because his numbers are just not there to, back up a 12 or 13 million dollar per year contract. And I think that Monty does want to be back in Chicago as well. I mean, he already talked about wanting to be back in Chicago if Ryan Poles actually wants him back. And I think that would be a good deal for both sides here. A lot of guaranteed money for Monty to have him return to Chicago. Next, I'll be signing linebacker Nicholas Moreau to a 2-year deal worth $10 million with a first-year cap hit of $5 million. Nicholas Moreau had a very underrated 2022, guys. I mean, he had 116 total tackles, the only linebacker that played the entire year and was very productive. And I think that with his athleticism in the scheme, being in the scheme for another year, I think it would make a lot of sense to re-sign him. He's only 27 years old. A 2-year contract is not going to break the bank, but would provide you with a solid level starter in this Eberflus defense. I'll also be re-signing defensive tackle Armin Watts to a 1-year deal worth $2 million, only as depth. Okay, he's not going to be a starter next year, but as depth, I think it'd be a pretty solid addition to have. He only had 1 sack last year, so not very productive last year, but we claimed him on waivers from the Vikings. And some games you could see the explosion, you could see the pressure, but it just was not that consistent. But as a backup, I think this will be a pretty good deal. Let's also bring back DeAndre Houston Carson to a 1-year deal worth $2 million. DHC is a special teams ace. He's been a backup safety too for us for a long time under 2 regimes now, under Ryan Pace and Ryan Poles. And I think that makes total sense to bring him back because he's very reliable for you on special teams. Okay, he's your best special teams guy. He's a leader of your special teams. And when he does, have to fill in that safety when there are injuries, he's shown he can do that as well. So we're going to renew our annual DeAndre Houston Carson subscription for another year. Next guy, long snapper Patrick Scales, 1 year, $1.3 million. I don't have to talk about this too much. I mean, obviously he's been on the team for a long time, and it doesn't make sense to change long snappers if you don't have to. Okay, so bring him back for another year. We're going to bring back Kari Blasingame, the fullback, to a 1-year deal worth about $1 million. Now, Kari Blasingame was pretty important to a lot of the plays that the Bears ran last year, especially all the running that they did. He was a lead blocker on some of them, and even in pass protection, he was pretty reliable for Justin Fields. So if they do want to stick with, more of the run game next year, even if they don't, guys, even if they run the ball much less than they did this year, this scheme still requires a pretty adequate fullback, and Kari Blasingame definitely is that. And lastly, let's bring back cornerback Josh Blackwell to a 1-year deal worth $775,000. It's going to be a pretty low deal because I believe the Bears have the option to bring him back at this price because he was a waiver claim whose contract was ending soon. I'm not totally sure how that works, but according to the website, it is $775,000, and I think that would be a no-brainer for the Chicago Bears. I mean, this guy had to start down the stretch with all the injuries that we had, and he played relatively good in coverage. I mean, against the Packers, he actually made a bunch of plays on the ball and held his own at least for the first half. Okay, so as depth, he's a solid player to have, and he's only 23 years old as well, so a lot of room to grow in the future. All right, guys, so after re-signing our own guys, we still have about $103 million to spend in free agency on players from other teams, and let's just get into it, guys. Okay, we have a lot of needs to fill, a lot of players we have to sign, and let's begin. All right, my first signing, the biggest splash, is going to be defensive tackle Darren Payne from the Commanders to a 4-year deal worth $80 million with a first-year cap hit of $14 million. A lot of guaranteed money here too. I'm going to guarantee $55 million to convince him to go to Chicago because he'll have a lot of suitors out there. Okay, a lot of people will want Darren Payne if he does not get franchise tagged by the Commanders, which is also another possibility. Okay, so even him getting to free agency is going to be relatively hard, but the Commanders might not, extend or re-sign him because they already have so many assets dedicated on the defensive line, and the Bears could use a guy like a Darren Payne on their defensive line. Darren Payne is one of the best run defenders in the NFL. So if you want a guy that can, eat up those gaps and plug up those running lanes that we have not been able to plug up in the last year, we had one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. Darren Payne obviously is going to help us out big time there, but he's also going to be a, really good pass rusher for us too, potentially, right? Because last year with the Commanders, he had 11.5 sacks from the defensive tackle spot, okay, which is absolutely insane. He has explosion, he has raw power, he has the ability to move people at the line of scrimmage, which obviously the Bears defensive line did not do enough of last year. And the best part of all, guys, he's only 26 years old, okay, so he's still going to be, fitting in with the timeline of this Bears team. Obviously, we are a pretty young team, and being, 26, he fits in with that timeline perfectly, and he can be a defensive anchor that we can build around for many years to come. Staying on the trenches with the defense, I'll be signing edge rusher Yannick Ngakoue to a 2-year deal worth $25 million with a first-year cap hit of $12 million, and most of the contract guaranteed, okay, so $20 million guaranteed. Now, the Bears need pass rushing help very badly, okay? Jaquan Brisker, our safety, led the team in sacks last year with 4, which is unacceptable, okay? We had no pass rush whatsoever, which is why we had the worst defense in the NFL in terms of points allowed per game. And Yannick is a pass rushing specialist, guys. Okay, he's not going to offer you too much in terms of run defense. So yes, that is one downside of signing him. Okay, you're not going to get a very talented premier run defender, but you are getting a guy that can get to the quarterback, and the Bears need more of those. Okay, we cannot stick with Gibson and Dominic Robinson and pray for the development. We need a guy that has production. He had 9.5 sacks last year. He had 10 the year before that with the Raiders. He's been moving around from team to team recently on one-year contracts, but now I feel like he can cash in on a 2-year contract with the Chicago Bears and provide them with much badly needed pass rushing help. Going to the offensive side of the football now, in the trenches still. Okay, Caleb McGarry, offensive tackle. I'll be signing him to a 4-year contract worth $52 million with a first-year cap hit of $9.1 million. He would be the Chicago Bears right tackle for the next 4 years. He's only 28 years old, and he seems like a very Ryan Poles type of offensive lineman. Okay, Ryan Poles so far with the Chicago Bears, he's exclusively only added athletic linemen for the most part. Okay, Lucas Patrick, athletic guy. Braxton Jones, very athletic tackle. All the offensive linemen he drafted, also very, very athletic for the most part, right? And Caleb McGarry is one of the most athletic tackles in the NFL. He can move to the second level. He can maul people in the run game. He's a good zone blocker, and the Bears have a zone blocking based scheme on the offensive line. So a perfect fit there in the scheme with Chris Morgan, offensive line coach. And, one of the best run blockers in all of football, right? And, for a Bears team that does run the football a lot, even though we're not going to run it as much as we did last year, we're still going to run it at a pretty decent rate next year. Having an elite run blocker is going to be a big benefit on the right side of that offensive line. And also in terms of pass protection, he's still an upgrade over what Larry Borom, gave us last year, and potentially what Riley Reif gave us last year as well. Okay, both of those two options were not the most reliable in pass protection, but McGarry actually had his best year in pass pro of his career last year, so maybe he's still ascending in that regard. And, being athletic, obviously he can also move with Justin Fields when he does, sometimes take off from the pocket. So I think that would be a perfect signing on the right side of that offensive line. Now I'm going to stick on the offensive line and sign guard Ben Powers from the Ravens to a 4-year deal worth $36 million with a first-year cap hit of $6.3 million. The Bears need as much help as they possibly can get on the offensive line, especially in terms of pass protection. Okay, the Bears passed the ball at the lowest rate in the NFL, but Justin Fields got sacked an ungodly amount of times. Okay, obviously Justin Fields can also improve in terms of, getting the ball out quicker, but a lot of it was due to how bad the offensive line was in pass protection. And Ben Powers is one of the best available pass protecting guards. Okay, he's not going to be as athletic as, a Caleb McGarry, so maybe not, a preferred Poles body type, right? Like Poles does want the more athletic guys, and maybe that's one reason why we, maybe won't sign him. But I do think from a pass protection standpoint, he was really good last year for the Ravens. Okay, didn't allow a single sack the entire year. So he's definitely going to help Justin Fields have more time in the pocket. And also he was playing in a very run heavy scheme with the Ravens. So even though he can't move as much as, the more athletic lineman, he still played in a, in the run heavy scheme and still held his own for the most part. Okay, the advanced stats in regards to run blocking are not kind to him. So, they don't think he's a good run blocker, but everybody else on the Bears offensive line is a good run blocker. So I think that can make up for his deficiencies as a run blocker. And we need his pass protection pretty badly on this offensive line. Let's go off the line of scrimmage now, sign off-ball linebacker Bobby Okereke from the Indianapolis Colts to a 3-year deal worth $25.5 million with a first-year cap hit of $7 million. Eberflus has coached Okereke already with the Colts when Eberflus was the defensive coordinator there, and I think it makes perfect sense for a reunion, right? I mean, the Bears need help at linebacker. They traded away Roquan Smith. Bobby is a Mike backer. He played Mike for the Colts the last, couple of years, and he's been very productive for them. Last year, he actually had 151 total tackles, which is nuts. Okay, so a very productive tackler, a guy that's very good against the run too. So obviously the Bears needing to improve that run defense. This would be a, fantastic fit in the scheme. And obviously, Okereke already knows the scheme very well. He knows Eberflus very well, and it will be, a very good match for both sides to give him this contract. Also, he's only 26, so he fits in with the timeline of the team as well. Now, lastly, we're going to sign a tight end, Robert Tonyan from the Packers, to a 1-year deal worth $4 million. Obviously, he has familiarity with Luke Getsy. They worked together back in 2020 when he had 11 touchdowns and made the Pro Bowl. Luke Getsy was there on the coaching staff, right? So he knows the scheme, he knows the system, and we need another, tight end behind Cole Kmet, right? Because we can't just have Cole Kmet being the only focus at tight end, okay? We need another receiving option behind him, and Tonyan has been a pretty decent tight end for the Packers, okay? He's not elite or anything, he's not even good, I would classify him as, but as a backup tight end for the Bears, he could have a lot of value for us, okay? Especially in the red zone where he had, 11 touchdowns back in 2020. Last 2 years, he only had 2 touchdowns apiece, but last year with the Packers, 470 receiving yards, and a guy that, can be schemed open and give you value as a pass catcher. So another guy for Justin Fields to throw to. All right, guys. So after free agency, we still have about $50 million to spend, which I'm not going to be spending right now because I actually have a trade coming up, which is going to cost us some of this cap space right after this segment. And you can see, guys, I spent most of my money on the trenches, okay, offensive and defensive line, because I feel like that's what the needs are the most on this team right now, okay? You can't have a functional team without having a functional offensive and defensive line. And last year, the Bears clearly did not have a functional trenches, okay? We didn't have a functional offensive and defensive line, and you need to be winning in the trenches if you want to be, winning these games in the future. So I think it makes total sense for the Bears to attack, the trenches in free agency because you want players there that are proven to be good already in the NFL. Now you can see I didn't address receiver at all in free agency because I feel like the value is just not there for a number 2 or a number 3 receiver. Okay, there's no true dominant alpha number 1 available in free agency, so I'm not going to overpay a number 2 or number 3 receiver $20 million per year just because we have a need there, because that would be a bad use of your funds. I'm not going to overpay a guy like a DJ Chark or like a Juju Smith-Schuster or like a Jacoby Myers, who are all really good players, don't get me wrong, but they're not true alpha number 1s that we need on this team for next year. But I do have a trade coming up, so let's go over trades now for this offseason. All right, my first trade is going to be with the Arizona Cardinals with new GM there. Monty Ossenfort is looking to move off of older pieces to get younger and to potentially rebuild, right? Because I'm not really sure what the Cardinals are doing right now. They have Kyler Murray, out for most of next year, and they have just a chaotic situation going on there. So they want to kind of get rid of older guys and move them to other teams potentially, right? There actually was a report that the Cardinals might look to trade DeAndre Hopkins this year, and I think it makes total sense for the Bears to do a trade with them. Okay, we would be trading a 3rd round pick this year and a 5th round pick next year in exchange for wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. And I know that a lot of people in the comments will say, why would you trade for an older receiver that's 31 years old that had a PED suspension at the beginning of last year? He got injured a little bit the year before that. Why would you do that when the entire mock offseason so far has been about going in a younger direction? And my answer to that is that we cannot risk giving Justin Fields another year without a true number 1 dominant receiver. Okay, even though D-Hop is older, he had a suspension last year, obviously, he's maybe not the same guy that he was in 2015, 2016. He's still a top 10 receiver without a doubt when he actually is healthy. Okay, last year, even though he, missed a good handful of games at the beginning of the year, he still finished the season with 717 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, even without Kyler Murray in some of those games down the stretch. Okay, so still a very productive receiver, a guy that can go down the field, win his matchups, get open, make the contested catch. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time now in the NFL, and he's still a true number 1 receiver in my opinion. And we cannot risk, again, giving Justin Fields a team without a true number 1, because this year we're going to be finding out if he actually has what it takes to be the franchise quarterback of the Bears for a long time, if he can take the next step forward as a passer. And that's only possible if you surround him with the pieces that enable him to do that, and D-Hop would be one of those pieces. Now, D-Hop would only be a 2-year rental. Most likely his cap hits for the following 2 years for the acquiring team are going to be $19.45 million in 2023 and $14.915 million in 2024, which is very reasonable for a guy that's still a top 10 receiver in my opinion. And in that time being, in that time frame, we can draft a receiver hopefully to be the number 1 of the future. Maybe next year, get Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State in the draft, okay? But I feel like this year there's not a true number 1 available in the draft or free agency, so you have to go on the trade market for this. And again, I cannot risk, relying on, Mooney to take the next step or Claypool to take the next step or relying on a rookie to take the next step, because we need Justin Fields to have a true number 1 right now immediately, and D-Hop would be that. Now, people could say it might cost more to trade for D-Hop in real life. It might cost like a 2nd round pick, which could be true, but our 3rd round pick is going to be very high at the top of the 3rd round, and that 5th round pick is an added bonus too. And obviously he's not going to be going for like a 1st round pick with all the uncertainty surrounding his his age, the PED suspension last year. So I think this will be a fair price to pay for D-Hop. Next, we'll be doing a draft pick trade, okay? So middle of April, probably right before the draft, Ryan Poles is finally going to say yes to one of these offers he'll be receiving all offseason long. I'm sure he's going to be receiving a lot of calls in the next few months, but he's finally going to be saying yes to one of these deals before the draft. And I think that deal is going to be with the Indianapolis Colts, because like I've mentioned this entire offseason, I feel like they're the most desperate for a quarterback in the draft this year, okay? Their owner, Jim Irsay, is kind of crazy, and he wants to win now. He wants that prize rookie quarterback that he can, sell to the fan base. And, Chris Bauer knows that he needs to get one to save his job. So I think in this trade, okay, it's going to be pick number 4, pick number 35, a future 1st round pick, and a future 2nd round pick in exchange for pick number 1. It's going to be a lot to move up only 3 spots. But again, they're going to be bidding against other teams like the Texans potentially, like the like the Panthers, like the Raiders that might want a quarterback at the top too. So a bidding war could, give the Bears a very enticing offer to move back just a couple spots, and this would be the perfect scenario for the Chicago Bears. That first round pick next year could be really high because most times rookie quarterbacks do not win a lot of games, and that second round pick also in turn would be very high. So a lot of high value draft picks both this year and next year that the Bears would be getting to only move back 3 spots. So a really good deal for the Chicago Bears. Alright, so after accounting for the D-Hop trade, after accounting for that $19.5 million cap hit for this year, we still have about $31 million in cap space, which is pretty funny because most teams at the beginning of free agency this year, they don't even have that much money. But the Bears, after doing all these moves, after re-signing guys, after doing a trade as well, still have $31 million to spend. That's just how much money we have this offseason. I'm not going to be spending any more of it right now because we still have to re-sign, not re-sign, but we have to sign our new draft class, which is going to cost us some money, obviously, because high picks like, pick number 4 is going to be a $6.6 million cap hit for this upcoming year. So even though he's a rookie, whoever we select, he's going to be paid, a decent amount of money. And we also have to have some money for in-season signings at the end of this year. And also we're going to be doing extensions too after the draft. But right now we have the NFL draft, okay? And we have 8 total picks. We have multiple picks in rounds 2, rounds 4, and rounds 5. I got an extra second round pick from the Colts in that trade back from 1. I traded away a third round pick in the D-Hop trade, but we have 8 total picks, and let's begin with the draft. With pick number 4, the Chicago Bears will be selecting Will Anderson Jr., edge rusher out of Alabama, okay? The 2-time Bronco Nagurski Award winner, the best defensive player in college for back-to-back years, will be headed to the Chicago Bears to add to their pass rush, and they badly need a guy like him, okay? And honestly, whoever's left over between him and Jalen Carter, I would be okay with. So depends on what the Cardinals do at pick number 3. If pick number 1 and 2 are both quarterbacks, whoever's left between Jalen Carter or Will Anderson probably is going to be going to the Chicago Bears because they need one of those 2 elite premium players very, very badly. And Will Anderson, guys, in college had 207 total pressures in 3 years at Bama. In comparison, Myles Garrett, pick number 1 in 2017, had 164 pressures in 3 years at Texas A&M. Okay, so Will Anderson, playing for the best of the best at Alabama, had a crazy amount of pressures. He had 17.5 sacks in 2021. He only had 10 this year, which I'm saying only like that's a small amount, but it's really not. Okay, in the SEC, 10 sacks is a damn productive year, and his explosion off the line, his ability to power rush and speed rush, his run defense is really good. Okay, so he's an all-around very good player, a very high-end talent that would be a very good addition to the Bears defense, a guy you build around on this defense for many, many years to come. With pick number 35 that we got from the Colts, I'll be selecting Darnell Wright, offensive tackle out of Tennessee. Darnell Wright was a very good tackle in college, guys. In the SEC, he did really well against Will Anderson, actually, the guy that just picked before this. Okay, one of the only guys in all of college football that actually did a really damn good job against Will Anderson Jr. And his ability to anchor and pass protection is very refined for a college player. Okay, he did not lose against the bull rush very often at all during his entire college career, both at left tackle and at right tackle, which another plus about him, he's played both left tackle and right tackle for the Tennessee Volunteers. So, for the Chicago Bears, presumably being a backup at the beginning of his career, he could be a very handy backup if he has to fill in for Braxton Jones or if he has to fill in for Caleb McGarry, if any of them actually do get injured. So very strong guy, a very high IQ guy that had a good Senior Bowl. I think he would be a very solid addition to the Chicago Bears offensive line. And, you can never have too many good offensive linemen. Speaking of the offensive line, with pick number 53, we're going John Michael Schmitz, the center from Minnesota, a local guy that grew up near Chicago in the suburbs, and, a guy that I actually picked on my last mock draft. So you guys already, heard my opinion on this guy. And man, he was a beast at the Senior Bowl. Okay, a guy that impressed a lot of coaches, a lot of scouts there, and a guy that just has the intangibles that you want for a starting center on your offensive line. The center is the leader of the offensive line, okay? The guy that touches the football every single time, and you want that guy to be smart, high IQ guy that knows how to call protections, knows how to be fundamentally sound, knows how to win in a variety of different ways. He was a 5-year starter at Minnesota, so has a lot of experience, obviously, and experience is a plus at the center spot when you are going to be, touching the football every single snap. So he would be a very good addition to the Bears offensive line and probably would be the starting center in place of Lucas Patrick in week 1. With pick number 103, I'll be selecting Jaden Reed, receiver out of Michigan State. The Bears need more help on the receiving core still, okay? Even though I got D-Hop, even though we still have, Mooney and Claypool, we need a good number 4 because right now we don't have one. And Reed would be a fantastic complementary piece. The guy that's elite after the catch. So at Michigan State, whenever he had the ball in his hands, he made guys miss in the open field. He doesn't have like top end burning speed, but he is fast enough to get down the field, to go side to side. He has short area quickness, so very good route runner. He uses his football IQ to his advantage, so knows how to get open, guys, is what I'm trying to say. And the Bears need more guys that know how to get open and that can produce after the catch, like a Jaden Reed can. And again, you can never have too many playmakers. Injuries always happen, and you need guys, at the number 4, number 5 spots that can fill in when need be and, produce when those guys actually go out. And he would still be on the field every single game, even as a depth guy, because he does, offer you a lot of versatility. He lined up at a bunch of different spots at Michigan State, in the X and the Z and the slot as well, as a motion guy in jet sweeps, right? So he's very versatile. He knows how to get open. He said he loves Justin Fields at the Senior Bowl, so a perfect match with the Chicago Bears. With pick number 133, I'll be selecting Zach Pickens, defensive tackle out of South Carolina. Now, Zach Pickens offers you a lot of versatility as a 0 tech or as a 3 tech. So if he has to fill in for Justin Jones, he could do that. If he has to fill in for Darren Payne, he could do that as well. He could be a rotational guy, on third down or something to keep guys fresh. And you need guys like that on your defense. Okay, versatile guys that can play multiple spots on the interior of the defensive line. And this guy, man, has a combination of power and size that is very enticing. He's 6'4", weighs 305 pounds, very big, very strong guy. He doesn't have the fully, developed arsenal of hand-fighting moves yet because he is kind of raw, but he can be coached up in the NFL, and he has the traits that you want on the defensive line, okay? The traits that you can actually build upon if you actually coach him up properly. So, as a rotational guy, maybe providing the Bears with some, pass rushing here and there, maybe providing some run defense here and there, he could be a solid addition to the Bears defensive line. With pick number 137, the Bears will be selecting Deuce Vaughn, running back out of Kansas State. The Bears need a better RB3. Treston Ebner definitely was not cutting it last year. He was a bad pick in hindsight by Ryan Poles, it seems like, right? Because he provided the Bears with no value whatsoever when he was actually on the field last year. And I feel like Deuce Vaughn would be a better RB3 from a receiving and a rushing perspective as well. He's very small, obviously 5'6", only 170 pounds, so very much similar in stature to like a Tariq Cohen or like a Darren Sproles. But I think this offense could use a player like him because we just need more dynamic playmakers on this offensive squad, and he would be a playmaker, okay? Even though he's very small, he can go 0 to 100 really fast. He's a dynamic receiving option. He can accelerate very well. He can, move laterally very well. So as a pure receiving threat, as a change of pace back on runs to the outside, he could be a really nice option to have in this offense for Luke Getsy. With pick number 150, we'll be selecting Henry To'oTo'o, linebacker out of Alabama. Even though I got 2 linebackers in free agency, I re-signed Moreau, I got a new one, Bobby Okereke. We could still use more depth in this linebacking core and a guy to, mold into the eventual starter, maybe at Will Backer, maybe at, Mike Backer. And To'oTo'o could be one of those options, right? Because he was a very instinctual and very physical hitter in college. He has fantastic range and coverage because he is very athletic, so he can move sideline to sideline. He can keep up with, some of the faster receivers or tight ends he has to cover probably in the NFL because he did that, a lot in college at Bama, going up against the best of the best competition there. And, playing against the pass, he's definitely better there than against the run. But playing next to a better run defender like a Sanborn, I think that could be a pairing that would make a lot of sense for the Chicago Bears. And even if he doesn't play right away, even if he doesn't start right away, he could be a fantastic special teams guy for the Chicago Bears as well. And then lastly, with pick number 220, the Bears will be selecting Cameron Mitchell, cornerback out of Northwestern. Another local guy. I've been picking a lot of local guys in this draft, which is pretty funny. But Mitchell will be a fantastic developmental option in round 7. He's 6 foot tall, weighs 195 pounds, so good size, good length. He's athletic enough to survive in the NFL, I would say. And he's a very physical corner too, which the Bears have valued in their cornerbacks so far in the Eberflus Poles era. So as a depth guy, as a developmental guy, as a guy that plays on special teams at first, I think this would be a pretty solid pick for the Chicago Bears. All right, so after signing our 8-man draft class, we still have $17 million to spend in cap space, which I'll be using to extend some of our own players now, okay? So I'll be going through extensions, and possible candidates are obviously people that are going to have their contract ended after next season. So guys like Chase Claypool, Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, Jalen Johnson, those guys will be under extension talks probably in the next year. And let's talk about who I'm going to extend. First guy I'll be extending is tight end Cole Kmet to a 4-year deal worth $48 million with $25 million guaranteed and the extra cap hit this year of $5 million. Now, Cole Kmet has already had talks with Ryan Poles about an extension. Both sides want to come to terms on a deal, I've been reading, and it would make total sense to extend him after he had a pretty solid season last year in the new offense. Okay, reliable receiving option, pretty decent blocking tight end too. And he's obviously not elite or anything, but he is a good solid tight end. He had 7 touchdowns last year, career high, and he's on the upswing of his career. So I think it makes sense to lock in a solid tight end for 4 more years. Next, I'll be extending wide receiver Darnell Mooney to a 4-year deal worth $60 million with $40 million guaranteed and an extra cap hit this year of $7 million on the books. Now, Mooney has been a fantastic number 2 option for the Chicago Bears. Obviously, he's not a number 1. Last year proved he was not a true number 1, but as a complementary piece, he could be really good for the Chicago Bears for many years to come. He's already a favorite target of Justin Fields. He separates very well down the field. He has speed. He's shown the ability to sometimes make acrobatic highlight reel catches, and you need to lock guys in like this for the long term because you need as many receiving options in your team as possible. Okay, you can't just have 1 or 2 good receivers. You need a lot of them, right? So locking in Mooney at a pretty reasonable deal of 4 years, $60 million would be good for both sides, right? Because for Mooney, it's still a fantastic increase in pay from his rookie contract, still getting $15 million per year. But for the Bears, $15 million per year is not going to break the bank for a pretty reliable weapon. The next guy I think they might extend, but they also might just end up waiting on, is Jalen Johnson. Okay, so I'm actually not going to give Jalen an extension in this mock, but he very well could receive one because he has shown to be a reliable CB1. But the problem is he has gotten injured in the last 3 years of his career. Okay, every year basically he's had some type of injury. Last year he got injured for 6 games. The year before that I think he missed a couple. Year before that he missed like 3, I believe. So the injuries might complicate contract extension talks somewhat because I'm sure Jalen still wants his money, but Poles would want to protect the Bears in case Jalen gets injured again. So maybe we wait on this. Maybe we wait until the end of his contract and then, resume talks at the end of the season next year and maybe, give him the extension if he played really well the entire season without getting seriously hurt. So Jalen, I'm not extending, but he very well could be extended. And the next guy I'll be talking about, the last guy that could potentially be extended, but I don't think will be, is Chase Claypool, because we just have not seen anything from Chase Claypool so far to, lock him into a long-term extension. Okay, last year he was basically a non-factor when he actually was on the football field, which is obviously not entirely his fault. Okay, barely got any opportunities last year. He also got injured as well. Fields also got injured during that time span. So it was a chaotic mess last year. I'm not going to hold it too much against him, but he has to show he can actually fit in this offense next year before we actually invest in him in a long-term contract. So I'm not going to be extending Claypool either. All right, there you guys have it. That is the entire mock offseason from top to bottom, okay? Every single thing I went through is finally over. I still have $5.3 million in cap space left to use on emergency in-season signings if I have to, which every team has about $5 million for in-season cap, so we're good with that. We spent a lot of money on free agent signings, on extensions, etc., but we have finally reached the end. Okay, this is the final roster. I'll put on the screen right now. And I think this is a much improved roster from top to bottom. Okay, dramatically improved on both offense and on defense. Obviously, quarterbacks remain the same. Running back, I got a better number 3 in Deuce Vaughn. At the receiver spot, I finally got a true number 1 for Justin Fields and D-Hop. I got a better depth option in Jaden Reed. Got a better backup tight end, a red zone threat in Robert Tonyan. If you look at the offensive line, dramatically better there. Okay, got Ben Powers, John Michael Schmitz, and Caleb McGarry. 3 new starters on the offensive line and a better backup tackle too in Darnell Wright to develop. The D-line got completely made over besides for Justin Jones. Added Darren Payne, a superstar on the D-line. Got Zach Pickens too behind him. Got some potential star edge rushers in Yannick Ngakoue and Will Anderson Jr. If you look at the linebacker spot, I added Bobby Okereke from the Colts. I also drafted Henry To'oTo'o. And the cornerbacks and safeties remain mainly the same. I did not get the chance to address the secondary, but with how stacked the D-line is now, okay, with Darren Payne, with Yannick Ngakoue, Will Anderson Jr., like so many better players on the D-line, you won't be having to be out in coverage for 7 seconds like you had to be last year. So I'm assuming that's going to improve the secondary as it is, just improving the D-line up front. But that is finally the end of this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you guys for watching 40 minutes of my content, for watching all this. But leave your comments down below, guys. Okay, what would you change about this mock? What would you do differently? Let me know down below. Obviously, I have it linked down below, the link to the spreadsheet I made. Again, shout out to Quentin Crisco for creating the spreadsheet to help me out with the math behind this. Otherwise, it would have taken me even longer than it took me to make this video. But man, I cannot wait for the real offseason, okay? It's a month away. The possibilities are endless. Ryan Poles, get to work, man. You have a lot to do this year because we need a better roster next year. We have to surround Justin Fields with actual talent next year, and I'm confident we can do that if it goes something like this. Leave your comments down below. As always, bear down.